into the database to talk a little bit more broadly about screening and intake with ICAN. Whether, and this is, some of this is really hotline specific. So for those of you specialists who are helping us with the hotline, obviously that will be relevant to you. But even for our CBOs, you might not be taking hotline calls directly, but we might be transferring them to you. We definitely will be transferring them to you. And we'll also be, you're going to be getting cases through your own intake streams. And it's not our intent to override whatever intake process you're doing right now. Okay, I mean, you have your own intake system, and that's fine. You can continue to use that, whether you're a CBO or a specialist. We know that you have your own internal processes, and we're not trying to supersede those in any way. But just to ensure a minimum of consistency across the network, there are a few things that I'd like everyone to try to observe if they can. And if not, that's something that we can talk about. This is, I think all of this is a work in progress. So I'm just going to start with a little bit of background on what is the scope of ICAN in the first place. We've had a lot of questions about that. It's a surprisingly tricky question. What makes something an ICAN case? Well, the proposal, which is sort of the only working document we have at this point from the state, said that the Ombudsman will provide participants in both MLTC and FIDA programs and LTSS MMC plans with direct assistance in navigating their coverage and in understanding and exercising their rights and responsibilities. So from that, what I take from that is really it has to do with what plan are you in. That's what makes you a potential ICAN client. So if you're in an MLTC, if you're getting long-term care services in a mainstream Medicaid managed care plan, or if you're in a FIDA plan, or if you're a prospective member of any of those, if you're trying to, enroll in one of those plans, and obviously also if you're a friend, family member, advocate, social worker, caseworker, even a concerned provider, a doctor, nurse, home attendant. I mean, I really want us to take a broad definition of who can be a caller that we're going to talk to, because people in this population are so likely to have someone else helping them that I don't want to shut those folks out. But I think there's a second factor we have to consider as well, because, for example, someone might be a member of an MLTC plan, but they might have an issue that has nothing to do with their enrollment in the MLTC plan. If somebody who's in an MLTC plan has a prescription drug denial from their Part D plan, I think that would be out of scope because it's really something that's not related to their MLTC, being a member of the MLTC plan. And there are other programs, and some of us are part of those other programs that provide assistance to, for example, Medicare beneficiaries with prescription drug denials. So let's get them, routed to the proper program. So I have a list here, and obviously I'll share this with everyone. I have a list here of some examples of things that we think would be covered, and some things that we think would not be covered. So one big question is about Medicaid eligibility stuff. And I think that there's some gray area there, and there may be even some variations among the network in terms of whether these would be in or out. But in terms of Medicaid issues that have a firm nexus with MLTC or FIDA. I think those are germane, like the dreaded coding problems that we see so much of, where somebody has applied for and been approved for Medicaid, and then they're trying to enroll in an MLTC plan, and they're told that they can't because there's some sort of code on their case that needs to be removed. That's something that I think is fairly within the scope. Another one might be if somebody's trying to apply for Medicaid and they need help dealing with the conflict-free evaluation and enrollment center. If someone is trying to get spousal impoverishment budgeting or the nursing home housing subsidy, those are Medicaid eligibility, Medicaid budgeting issues, but you only have those issues if you're in an MLTC plan, and so that's something that would be within the scope. People who are having problems with their spend down who are in MLTC, for example, someone who's being involuntarily disenrolled from their MLTC plan because they haven't paid the spend down, that would definitely be within the scope. I think generally a garden variety Medicaid application, even if it is for someone who's trying to get into MLTC, I think that's something where it's a little bit of a gray area. So I think for some of us, if the service that you're providing the person is to get them Medicaid home care through MLTC, part and parcel of that is getting them on community Medicaid. And so, I realize that's something, I have it here under not covered, but I think we maybe should call that more of a gray area, because I think for some of us, it's sort of hard to separate that from the MLTC, the enrollment in MLTC. So we may have to kind of take some of these on a case-by-case basis, and maybe have further discussions with each of you separately about which cases you think you're going to be able to count towards what your organization has proposed to produce for ICAN. So are there any questions at this point just about what's within the scope and what's out of the scope? I don't see any hands. Oh, there we go. Hi, Patricia. I just unmuted you. Oh no, I can't unmute you because you have to enter your PIN in order for me to unmute you. I think you didn't enter your audio PIN yet. There we go.
Oh, great. Thanks, David.
Sure.
I am wondering if the same rules apply also with pooled trust applications. Is that something where they need a pooled trust so that they can have long-term care services without a spend down, or if you think the pooled trusts are sort of automatically outside of the scope?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think our original thinking on it was that pooled trusts were outside of the scope. So I think that's what we're gonna go ahead with. If you feel like there's a really compelling argument why they should be included, then that's something maybe we would have to go back to the state about. We still don't have a contract yet, nor do any of you guys, unfortunately. So, a lot of the guidance that we would want to see from the state is, we don't have it yet. So we're kind of making it up as we go along. And I'm trying to make assumptions based on, both what we know from the original proposal and what we want the answer to be, basically. And then hopefully, if we're doing the right thing, then the state will say, "Oh yeah, okay, that's fine. I'm glad that you interpreted it that way." But pooled trust, I'm a little worried, is something where if we ask the question, we're going to get an answer we don't like. I'm pretty sure the state doesn't want us doing pooled trusts.
Okay, great. I just wanted to clarify that. So.
Yeah, that's a really good one, and it's unfortunate because there's a huge need. Obviously there's a huge demand for pooled trusts, but there just isn't, there isn't enough funding to help people with that. So I'm afraid we're not going to be helping much with that problem. Were there any other questions about scope? All right. And I mean, I come from the my mentality, from my prior background was really we at NILAG, well, in the Evelyn Frank program, we had a real hard time saying no to cases, and I bring that with me. And I recognize, you want to provide a holistic service to a client, and I don't want us to be in a situation where we're, bringing out these technicalities and say, well, we can't help you because you don't fit into any of our funding buckets. I want us to find a way to get somebody what they need, hopefully within our network, but if not, to refer them to someone who can help them. Here at CSS, I'm lucky to have community health advocates, right next door, and so when there are calls that come in on the ICAN hotline that are, slightly outside of the scope, I can very smoothly hand them off. And I know for a lot of you, it's a similar situation. You have other funding, you have other projects that may have different scopes, and that you can sort of shift people into, a complementary program. But if not, just let me know. I really want to be available to everyone. Since I'm not giving you the clearest guidance in the world, and I realize that, I know there are going to be some issues some questions on the margin, and just let me know what they are, and we'll figure them out as we go. So the next thing was to talk a little bit about intake. Like I said, I'm not trying to replace your existing intake process, but just to have some uniformity across the coalition, the network. There are some things I'm thinking we should try to have consistency about. So for those of you who are actually answering the hotline, we're gonna finalize that schedule. Everybody will have shifts, or some of us will have shifts where we're actually answering live hotline calls, and that's an amazing benefit for us as we get in the next couple months, as the number of FIDA notices increases, as they start putting our information on MLTC notices. The call volume is going to ramp right back up. Maybe not as high as it was in December, but it'll get up there. And having all hands on deck is really helpful for that. I also think it'll make it easier for the specialists to meet their deliverables, and it'll make it, it'll just sort of spread the work more evenly. So if you've signed up for a shift, obviously the first thing is you have to log into the queue. And again, for those of you who are not doing this, I apologize that we're talking about something not relevant to you, but there's this system called Phonality that has a queue that you sign into through an application on your computer, and then that makes the bat phone on your desk start ringing if someone calls the helpline, and and it's your turn. It uses a round robin algorithm to go through all the people who are signed into the queue at a given time, regardless of where they're sitting. So we've got a phone in Albany, and a phone in Rochester, and a phone at Medicare Rights Center, and a phone at Legal Aid, and of course we've got 6 phones here at CSS, and whoever signed into the queue will get hit up for answering the phone as long as they're in the queue. Obviously, if you're doing something else, and especially for you specialists, I don't expect you to be, just sitting there staring at the phone, waiting for the phone to ring when you're on your shift. You all have other work to do. We realize that, and if a call comes in and you can't answer it, you don't have to answer it. You can push the ignore button and send it on to the next person in the round robin, and that's fine. I think we should all, when we're signed into the queue, we should be answering the phone as ICAN. Identify yourself and say, this is, like I say, this is David with ICAN, so that, because that's who people think they're calling. If you pick up the phone and say, hi, this is Community Service Society, they're going to say, I have no idea what that, I don't know who that is. That isn't who I thought I was calling. At this point, this gets into sort of my own personal philosophy of intake. And like I said, this may not be compliant with your own organization's intake policies. If so, you can ignore what I'm saying. But I think it's good food for thought. And if you have any flexibility in terms of your intake policies, this might be something to try out with the ICAN calls. And for the CBOs, this may apply to you as well if you have a telephone intake system, or if we're transferring calls to you from the helpline. I really believe in letting people tell their story before we start asking them lots of demographic questions for our database. And I'm going to spend most of the call, haranguing you about demographic questions for our database, but that's not the most important thing we do, and that's not, in my opinion, very good client interviewing. These are people who are in some sort of, either crisis or at least an information crisis. They're probably anxious. In many cases, they've been calling other people and getting runaround, and probably many of the other entities that they're calling are giving them a laundry list of personal questions before they even offer to help them, and then in many cases aren't helping them anyway and just telling them they don't know and call somebody else. So by the time they get to us, they may have already gotten the runaround. I don't want us to be just another step in the runaround. Like, we should be the place where they finally stop getting the runaround and start getting answers. So I think we get a lot of goodwill by just listening. Just start the call. You can find. Obviously, you need to know who the caller is. But maybe after just getting the basic preliminaries of like name and phone number, why are you calling? Can you tell me what's going on? In many cases, you don't have to even say that. They're gonna blurt it out before you can even get into asking any questions. But that's there's actually some research that shows that that's the most important part of the interview. When you're doing client interviewing, the caller is going to let the most important information for you. You're going to hear it in their first few sentences. It might be something about their reaction to something, sort of the emotional context, or or what they perceive to be the problem. It may not be the real problem, but it's something that will help you figure out how you have to help this person. So we don't want to lose that valuable information by making the caller wait through all of these questions before they get to tell their story. Another reason why I do this is that we are going to be asking them nosy questions. We are going to be asking them for personal information. You guys aren't going to share that with us, right? I mean, you guys can and should anonymize the cases that you're putting in the CHA database, but you may not be doing that for your own system. I mean, you probably have your own case management database where you collect, you have to put in the client's name and all this other stuff. And if you're going to be helping the caller with something, with some more in-depth advocacy, you're going to need to ask them, personally identifying information. People hate giving that over the phone. We're strangers. They don't know if we're just trying to sell them something. There's all these issues with identity theft, and this is real. I mean, there's a very strong public policy of trying to get, in particular, Medicare and Medicaid beneficiaries not to give their Social Security number over the phone to strangers, not to give their Medicaid number out. So here we are asking them for a lot of that stuff. So we shouldn't be surprised when people are reluctant to share it. And I have found, and results may vary, I've heard other people who say who found the exact opposite, but I have found people are much more likely to share that stuff with me after I've, A, listened to them empathetically while they tell their story, and B, after I've given them free advice. So I wait till the very end of the call. I say, let's just get down to business. Tell me why you're calling. Okay, let's help you with that. And I don't know much about I don't know anything about the caller, in terms of address, household size. I might need to know about insurance because I have to advise, I need that information just to advise them. But the stuff that's purely for demographic purposes, that I don't know anything. And we'll go through the whole call, and I'll give them the advice, and we may even make a conference call to New York Medicaid Choice, or maybe make a conference call to a plan, or whatever it is. And then at the end of the call, and I give them a heads up about this at the beginning. I say, at the end of the call, I'm going to ask you some nosy demographic questions if you don't mind. And then when we get to the end, I say, okay, now's the point in the call where I'm going to ask you the nosy questions. And really, 9 times out of 10, they're grateful that I helped them, and they're more than happy to answer whatever questions I have. So I feel like it actually improves compliance if you reverse the process like that. It's a little awkward from a data entry standpoint. I think a lot of the case management systems that we're using, including, for sure, the CHA database, don't lend themselves to that process. And even before you can start taking notes in the note-taking field, you have to first enter all this stuff about the client and enter all this stuff about the case. So my advice would be just open up a notepad, either an actual physical notepad with a real pen that you actually have to hold in your hand and move on the page, or you can use in Windows, there's an application called Notepad that you can just type in, or Word, or whatever you want, and just have a place to type notes, and start with that and enter it in the database later. For those of you who are legal services offices, and maybe even for those of you who are not, I realize you need to do a conflict check before you can do anything else. So that needs to come first. I realize that. We at CSS don't have to deal with that, but do the conflict check first. So you need to know who the client is. But once you've done the conflict check and you've cleared them, then I think, my advice is try this out. Try out, if you don't already do this, try doing that, letting the caller give their story. Use active listening techniques to draw them out. Don't start drilling them down into specifics. Just move them through their story until they get to the end, and then you can loop back. At that point, after they've sort of just gotten it off their chest, I like to sort of set the expectations a little bit. I'll say, okay, I'm really sorry to hear that you're going through this, or I understand you have a lot of questions. This is something I can help you with. That's really important to say. I'm going to be able to help you with that today, because most people can't. So we are called ICAN. It's not for nothing. So we can help you with that right now. So here's how it's going to work. First of all, who are we? So what my spiel is, I say, I'm with a nonprofit organization that has a contract with the state to provide information and assistance to people with Medicaid long-term care. All right? So that establishes who are we. I say then this call is completely confidential, which is going to be true, and we're independent. We're not affiliated with any of the plans, and we're not trying to sell you anything. Okay, so I have written up here this, this kind of script here. I've never used this actual script. I actually don't recommend it. I would probably rewrite that a little bit. It's too long. But that just gives you an idea of some of the kinds of things that you might want to use to just set the caller's expectations of where is this going to go. Definitely, I think the most important things are making sure to tell them that it's confidential, that we're independent, that we're a nonprofit organization that has a contract with the state, so that it just conveys this is an official program, right? We have the state's sanction here, and for some people, whether it makes sense or not, the fact that it's a nonprofit lends credibility to it as well. And the idea we're not trying to sell them something. Don't assume that people know this. People have no idea. I mean, if those of you who've been answering hotline calls, you already know this. People have no idea who they're calling, right? They think that we're FIDA. They think that we're the government. They think that we're a plan. They have no idea. So it does matter to say, okay, this is who we are. This is how I can help you. I'm going to ask you some more questions about your situation, or I might be able to answer your questions. And then if you need further help, I may be able to give you additional assistance, or I may be referring you to someone else who can. Okay, so that's the expectation setting part. And then maybe you can say at that point, although this call is totally confidential, we do report some demographic information to the state, so I may have some questions for you about that at the end of the call. Or you could wait, you could postpone that until you get to the end. But I think that's helpful, because people, when you start out saying, well, this is totally confidential, but then if it's confidential, why do you care what my race is, or what my zip code is, or what my household size is, or my income? Because that suggests that you're collecting data because you're going to report it to somebody. So I think making sure that people understand, yeah, we are actually disclosing some of the things you're telling us, but we're disclosing it in a non-personally identifying form, in the aggregate, for our statistical purposes. Again, I think most people get that, and if somebody doesn't, that's okay. As you'll see, the CHA database lets you omit just about anything. So if you have a caller who really genuinely refuses to answer your questions, you can still assist that person. You can still get credit for that case. But we just want to get as high compliance as we can with those demographic questions, even though it can be awkward. Try to get as much of that as you can, because it helps us get a better picture about the people that we assist. So at this point, I think things move into the more familiar territory, where you're now having to drill down a little bit on the caller's problem, or answering the caller's questions, and those are less open-ended questions, more detail-oriented questions, or even like leading questions. Like, for example, on a lot of these FIDA calls, the first thing we have to figure out is what kind of insurance does this person have now. So a lot of times we just assume. I'll say something like, so I assume right now you already have Medicare and Medicaid. Is that right? It just saves time. If you say, so what different kinds of health insurance do you have right now? You could be embarking on a half-hour-long journey through their purse. So sometimes it's easier to just, okay, let's cut to the chase. I know you got the FIDA letter. You've got Medicare and Medicaid. Let's move it along. And then you guys know how to do the rest. I mean, this is your job. I'm not going to tell you how to do it. I think another useful best practice with these is circle back and have next steps at the end of the call. So you may have answered questions, you may have given advice, you may have done some informal advocacy, or you may have just been identifying the problems and the possible solutions to those problems. And in those cases in particular, it's important to say, okay, what are we doing next? What am I, the advocate, going to do? And what are you, the caller, going to do? So on some of these, like the FIDA cases, if somebody wants to enroll in a FIDA plan, then the next steps are the caller needs to get together a list of all of their doctors and other providers so that I can check whether they're participating in the network of the plan. And the caller needs to get a list of their drugs together, right? So that might be the next steps. Or it might be, well, there's a new question that I don't know the answer to, and I'm going to have to research that and talk about it with my supervisor, and I'll give you a call back on X date, X time. I think it's really helpful to try to schedule an appointment, put it in the calendar to call the person back. It's a lot more likely that that it'll happen when you do that. That way everybody knows what to expect. And I think the last thing that I put here is just sort of common sense, and I don't think anybody really needs to be told this, but with all of this sort of the science behind doing intake and collecting all of this information, at the end of the day, you're a person who wants to help other people, and you've got somebody who needs your help on the other end of the line. And, just be a human being, just be a normal person. And, I think that really puts people at ease when they hear that, we're not like customer service representatives, We're going to sympathize with you. We're going to listen to your problems, and we'll walk you through what you need to get done. And people really, in my experience, respond to that. Just be real, be real with people. They can tell the difference. So does anyone have any questions about my my little spiel on intake? And I'm interested to hear if you all, in your own practice, if you have some best practices that you think would be beneficial for everyone else to think about. Because I don't claim to be, to have the perfect, the perfect intake method. I know there's a lot of different styles out there. Nope? All right. Let's forge ahead into our least favorite topic, the database. So for those of you who are CHA grantees, you already have this this database that you have to deal with, and you should already have accounts. You should already have logins for this database. If any of you, and I know some of you don't have logins, some of you are at organizations that aren't CHA grantees, or some of you are new staff and may not have logins yet. If you do not have a login to the CHA database, please send me an email. I've been trying to set them up for anybody new, who comes on, but I definitely know that I haven't gotten everybody. So just shoot me an email if you need a login, and I'll set one up for you. So the CHA database is actually a website. It's a just publicly accessible. Well, the login page is a publicly accessible website. It's just communityhealthadvocatesdata.org. So if you go to, in any web browser, if you go to communityhealthadvocatesdata.org, you'll get to the login page, and you can enter your username and password and access the database. So the way that this is working right now for the vast majority of people in the ICAN network is, unfortunately, you all have your own case management databases that you're using for all of the casework in your office, whether ICAN or otherwise. And that's where you're probably entering things in real time or close to real time as you're working on your cases. And that's fine. That's as it should be. Unfortunately, we do not have the technology at this point to use that data for ICAN. So we need everybody to re-enter all of their ICAN cases in this CHA database. As somebody who has dabbled in database design, I find this abhorrent, but it is what we're stuck with for now. I realize that this is a huge waste of time for skilled advocates who should be spending that time helping clients, not doing double data entry. But unfortunately, that's what we're stuck with. So my goal is, let's just learn how to do it quickly and efficiently and collect only what you need. I'm not going to ask you to collect data that I don't have a plan on how I'm going to use it. What that means, and one of the things that means, though, is at some point we might change our mind about what we want to collect if we have a need for it. Right now, the state has given me some templates about what types of data they want us to report on. So I'm only asking you guys to enter the data that I'm actually going to be giving the state, or that I have some other reason why I think we want to track it. So I think in the future, there'll be more stuff that we want to track. And then the sort of minimum set of fields that I'll be asking for might expand a little bit. But really my goal is to make this as easy for you guys as possible. So for most of you, I think what we're going to do is just say by the end of the month, because this is what the way it is for CHA, by the end of the month, try to have all your cases entered for that month. So, you know, I realize you're not entering them in here in real time. For many of you, there's a designated staff person at your organization who's going to do all of the CHA database data entry. That's fine. And just try to get all your cases in by the end of the month. And then if I'm running a report in the first week of the month, I want to be able to assume that it accurately reflects all the work that was done through the end of the prior month. Because I have to do a monthly report for DOH, and I want to be able to show off all of the great work that all of our specialists and CBOs are doing. And that helps me do it. The other thing is it helps me to monitor everyone's work with regard to the deliverables that your organizations all proposed that you would do, so that I can make sure everybody's on track. I mean, we don't want people falling behind and being in a real bind. So if I see that somebody's having trouble making their deliverables in a particular month, you know, we can have a conversation early on about how we can, you know, how we can help and, you know, make sure that you can, you know, keep up with, you know, what you thought you were going to do. But if there's a long delay in getting the cases in, then it makes it harder for us to do that. So we never really talked about that in December. So I don't expect anybody to have put their cases in for December, except for Greg Otten, who is always on top of things. But now is the time to make sure that you get your December cases in, and you know, pretty soon you'll want to have your January cases in too. But I'm cutting everyone some slack right now because it was such a crazy rollout. But going forward, we'd like to get on a pretty good schedule with that. All right, so the first thing that you're going to do when you're entering a case in the CHA database is look up the client. This first button up here, which is create or search a client. So I'm looking at the main menu right now. This is what you would see right after you've signed in to the website. And it just has a list of choices, and the first choice is create or search a client. So if we choose that, then it presents the client search screen, which has a list of fields. You could search by the client's ID number, or you could search by last name, first name, or you could search by phone number. So I think it's a good idea to look up, let's say, last name, first name. So I'm going to look up David Silva and see if he's in the database. And then I'm clicking on the search button. And then a little dialog box pops up that says no record was found in the system. So now we know that there is no David Silva in the system, and so I can create a new client record. So for you guys, I think this is mainly important so that if you have multiple cases for the same client, which will happen sometimes, that you don't enter a duplicate client, right? You just want to make sure that that client isn't already in there. Because if they are, then you can open multiple cases for the same client instead of having multiple clients, each with their own case. So I'll click Add New Client, and now this brings me to the Add Client screen, which is where most but not all of the nosy demographic questions are. So these first two fields at the top you can just ignore. Previous system, client ID, and family ID. We're generally not using those. What you can do, for those of you who have your own case management system, is it might not be a bad idea to, if your system generates a case number or a client number, put that in that first field, that previous system client ID. Put that in there, and that provides us with a non-personally identifying way to track back a case. So here's a good example. Let's say we're doing case review, and we're looking through cases that a particular CBO has entered in the database, and they're all anonymized, right? So you're not giving us the identifying information of any of your cases. And we see a case that somebody did where there's a certain issue that we really want to follow up on. And we want to go back to the CBO and say, hey, you guys opened a case last week that involves something, the particular issue happened with an MLTC plan. This is something that we were really following with the state. Is there any way we can get some more information about that case? And then the CBO says, which case? And we say, well, I don't know. You anonymized it. It's case number blah, blah, blah. And you guys are going to have no idea what I'm talking about. So one way to solve that problem is for you to take the case number from your own case management database and put it in this field. So there's a cross-reference. It means your client's identity is protected, but we have a way for us to track back to the identifying information, so you can then look it up and do any follow-up that we need to do. Another way to solve that same problem might be for you to take the CHA database client ID and save it in your own case management database in some searchable way. So either of those, I think, is acceptable. Right, and Greg, that's exactly the point. Greg just made an important comment that if you anonymize the case, you won't be able to find them if you search by name. Okay, so you can, if you have anonymized the case, then we wouldn't be able to track back to it unless you had some other system. And Greg was saying that at Sydney, they use a separate Excel spreadsheet to cross-reference their case numbers in their internal database with the case numbers in the CHA database. And that's one way to do it. That's definitely one way to do it. But I think the system that I was just proposing is that you would actually have so at Sydney, for example, whatever your database is, if it generates a unique ID number for each case or each client, you could put that ID number in this first field up here, previous system client ID. You could enter that in there, and so even if the case is anonymized, there would be a way for for us to find it. Either if you tell us, oh, our case number is 3009, and then we can look it up, or if we're asking you to look it up in your system, we could say, well, it's a Sydney case number 3009, and then as long as you have a way of searching your cases in your database by case number, you'd be able to retrieve it. Does that answer your question, Greg? Got it. Okay, great. So, and if you have specific questions about your own system and about you want to test this out and make sure it works, let me know. We can walk through it together. All right. So then, first name, last name. This is pretty straightforward. Now, you see there are some fields here that have an asterisk next to them, and that means that you need to enter that field, or else you can't save the client record. Now, let's say we want to anonymize this. I can click Client does not want to share information electronically, anonymize client. It still lets me put in first name and last name, but notice they're not mandatory anymore. They don't have those red asterisks next to them. So you don't even have to enter the client's name in here. You could just leave it totally blank, and that's acceptable. Okay? Yeah, so let's leave it like that actually, because that's what I think the majority of you are going to do. Okay. So there's date of birth, not mandatory. So I think date of birth is something that you'll want to collect if you need it for the work that you're doing on the case, but otherwise we don't need it. Address, not mandatory. Zip code is not mandatory, but please get the zip code. This is the first field I'm going to ask you to collect, even though it is all right, so Greg is just pointing out, in terms of the anonymizing, if you anonymize the case and you type the name, in, even though you said you wanted to anonymize, then it means once you click the print button, it will wipe the name. That's something that some people do. I think some of the subcontractors do, if they want to be able to look the case up again by name, but they don't want the client's name shared with community health advocates, with CSS, then I think they put the name in and then they just never print it. If you never click the print button, then it doesn't wipe the name, but it does keep it anonymous. I think that's right, Greg, isn't it? So that's another option, but I think most of you are probably going to want to not put the name in. So yeah, zip code is the first field that I want us all to collect, and again, it's only because the state is asking for it. So I'm going to be running a report that shows a breakdown of calls by zip code, and that really just helps us look at hot spots and cold spots and see, well, where are people calling ICAN from, and are there communities that aren't calling ICAN? And maybe we need to do more outreach in those communities. County, same story. County's mandatory, actually. So always get county and zip code. Obviously, you need phone number, because if you need to call the person back. Gender, race, and language at home are all mandatory. It is awkward to ask about race, but I think we should just get in the habit of doing it. If you feel like it will help things, you can assure the caller that they're eligible for the same type and level of services regardless of their answers to these questions, which is true. And I think it also helps prove that point if you wait to ask them their race until the end of the call, because by then you've already given them a service, so obviously it doesn't make any difference to us what their answer to the question is. Place of birth, not required. Language at home is definitely required. We want to know about language. That's one of the fields that I report on to DOH. They've asked me explicitly for a breakdown by language, and that's really key. One of the interesting phenomena, still slightly unexplained phenomena of ICAN, was that respondents to the FIDA announcement letter were disproportionately Russian speakers from Brooklyn. Nobody was expecting that. The state's still somewhat mystified by it. But if we don't collect what language the person speaks at home, we might not know that. So Greg, yeah, so in terms of what are the minimum pieces of data, yeah, zip code, language, plan, county, those are pretty much the minimum pieces of data, okay? Get as much as you can, but, you got to use your judgment. I know how it is. There's some calls where you have no problem, you feel comfortable asking the caller all of these things, they have no problem answering them, and then there's other calls where you really feel like they just want to get off the phone, you're inconveniencing them, or they're reluctant to give it up. That's completely fine. If you can at least get those 4 pieces, let's call it, because it's county, zip code, language spoken at home, and what plan they're in. These other fields are, I think, helpful. Not place of birth, I don't care about. In the U.S. since date, I don't care about that. limited English proficiency I do care about. So, I mean, it's just a yes or no. Either the person, and basically, if you had to do the call through through an interpreter, then that means they're limited English proficiency, okay? Or if you're talking to a family member or friend, you can say, does the person speak English? Or do they speak English well? And if not, then say yes to limited English proficiency. We also should always be asking how they found out about us. Obviously, in December and most of January, the only way that people find out about us was the FIDA announcement letter. And for that, you would say government agency. Some people, though, and more of them, will be getting our information from an insurance company notice. So you can pick that. And as time goes on and we do more outreach, there will be more and more of these other options that will apply, and we'll be adding some of our own options to this menu, which we'll educate, we'll notify everybody about as that happens. Okay? All right, so let's pick something for David, who's remaining anonymous. Just entering some values here. Okay, there we go. So now you've entered everything that you think you need to enter for the client. You don't have to click Save. At the bottom of the page, there's 3 buttons, Back, Save, and Add New Case. You can just click on Add New Case, and that will automatically save it and jump to the next screen. So now we've moved on from the Add Client screen to the Add Case screen. And so, again, at the top, it starts with this local client ID, local case ID, and the CHA CBO. That's important. That should be your organization. So this has a list of all of the different organizations here, and it should default to yours. That's associated with your user. It requires an open date. So that'll be, the date that the case came in. And then funding source should be ICAN. See, that's an option there. For those of you who have CHA contracts also, make sure that you pick the right one. I mean, I don't know if it defaults to CHA post-enrollment for some people, but make sure that you pick ICAN if you want to get credit for it on the ICAN side. Social Security number, we don't need it. We don't want it. Only if you need it for a particular case. If you're going to be advocating on somebody's behalf and you know that some government agency is going to ask for their Social Security number in order for you to talk to them, then you can collect it. But otherwise, I don't think we should be in the habit of collecting it. And actually, even in that situation, you wouldn't be putting it in the CHA database. So you should definitely skip that. We always want age range. So I said before, date of birth is not required, but age range, that shouldn't be too tough to get. And if somebody doesn't want to give you their age, you can always say, well, are you between 46 and 54? Are you between 55 and 64? And that way, maybe they feel a little bit more comfortable in answering that. Obviously, if someone declines to answer, you can choose decline to answer. Intake method, self-explanatory, language service provided in. Some of the fields here appear not to be mandatory, but they become mandatory when you're ready to close the case. So just keep that in mind. It's a little bit deceptive. It'll let you skip a lot of these fields in order to go to the needs and service section or save it, but then when it comes time to close the case, you're going to get a bunch of error messages. So my habit has been to just fill them out when I first get here. Is literacy related to case? Is language related to case? Look, those are useful. I want to know that information. So let's get in the habit of just doing it. And if you have to make assumptions in certain cases, that's fine. If you're talking to a client in English and it doesn't come up on the call that they can't read the notice, then you can just assume that the answers to these are no. If you're doing the call through an interpreter, or if you're speaking to the caller in a language other than English, and they have misunderstandings that are really based on the fact that the notice was not in their language, or that they couldn't find somebody at New York Medicaid Choice who spoke their language, or somebody at the plan who spoke their language, then language is related to the case. That's a real issue that we want to be able to track. Is, are people with limited English proficiency getting information in their own language? So, I'm sorry, Greg, when you said before, what are the 3 minimum fields? I realize we've gone way beyond 3 now. So it's probably more like, 7 or 8 minimum fields. But again, it's just use your judgment. And if you can't get it, you can't get it. But try, 90% of the time to get as much as you can. All right, so then the other really important thing is insurance. So here's how we're handling insurance. Primary insurance is Medicare, okay? If anybody, obviously for someone who doesn't have Medicare, if they just have Medicaid only, then you pick Medicaid, and then you'll pick their mainstream managed care plan, all right? But for any dual, their primary is going to be either one of these original Medicare options, so it has every possible combination of Medicare Parts A, B, and D, or it'll be Medicare Advantage. And then there's that small number of people who have an integrated plan as their primary insurance. So that could be Medicaid Advantage, Medicaid Advantage Plus, PACE, or now, of course, FIDA. And that would be their primary because it's supplanting their Medicare coverage. For the majority of callers who have original Medicare, under primary health plan, you should select none because with original Medicare, you aren't in a health plan, right? You just have government insurance. And that's all you need to fill in. We don't need to have effective date, insurance ID, or all that stuff. We don't need to have the PCP information either. Then secondary insurance is almost always going to be MLTC, right? Now, obviously, for someone who is in mainstream Medicaid, there won't be secondary insurance, right? It'll just be the primary insurance, and then you can leave the secondary blank. But for anyone who's a dual and has MLTC, we should choose for the secondary MLTC, and then you don't have to put Medicaid. Like, we don't need to put Medicaid under tertiary, okay? I think it's just cleaner this way. We know everybody who has MLTC has Medicaid, so I don't need you to explicitly put that in. And then this list is populated with every MLTC plan in the state, so you should be able to find the right one. Okay? We don't need to know about their Part D plan. We don't need to know about Epic. We might want to know, and we do want to know rather, about stuff like retiree coverage. So if the person has a retiree plan from their former employer, you can say commercial employer, non-marketplace, right? If the person has coverage from their union, you can choose union-sponsored. If the person has a Medigap, choose Medigap. That is important. That's one of the issues that we're tracking with FIDA is some of the potential enrollment problems that could affect people with that tertiary insurance. But I think the most important thing here is probably getting the MLTC plan in there. Again, that's one of the things the state is asking for. They want to have breakdowns by plan, and they're really hot-spotting. If there are a lot of calls coming from a particular plan, they're going to look closely at that and see if there's something that plan's doing wrong or doing right, or whatever it might be. Health status, we don't have to go into that. This stuff, again, this is in the category of the nosy demographic questions that would be nice to have but are basically optional. And then contact person, in those very many cases when you're talking to an informal caregiver, family member, something like that, please put that information in here. If you're, actually no, I'm sorry, I take that back. You don't need to put that in. You have that in your own database. You don't need to put it in our database. But I think it would be good to know, like, we don't need their identifying information, but I think it is good for us to know if if there was a friend or other relative or a power of attorney, social worker, somebody like that who was calling ICAN on behalf of the client. So actually, if you can just put contact type, even if you leave the name blank, at least pick the contact type, and that way when I'm running data, I can see what percentage of our cases came through an informal support of some kind. That is something actually we would like to track. So that's it for this screen. And then the final screen is the needs and service section. So there's that button at the bottom, go to needs and service section. And CSS has this hierarchy of needs. Everybody gets this one, needs basic orientation. It's the first option here. And when you check the checkbox, then it opens up another bunch of fields here. So what does health insurance mean? What is managed care? What options are available? Next steps. Whenever the database asks you, was this issue related to the Medicaid redesign, MRT, the answer is yes. Everything we do is related to MRT. So every call will get that 1.1 needs basic orientation. Let's say somebody's calling about opting out of FIDA. That would be 4.5, needs help requesting exemption. And then exemption type, FIDA opt-out. And there can be multiple needs, right? For someone else, it might be that they want to enroll in a FIDA plan. So for them, it would be needs to choose plan, 3.2a, right? And maybe you're helping them enroll, plan chosen and client enrolled, or you're giving them options, and then the client will enroll them by themselves. Let's say you're helping somebody with MLTC, and they asked for a service and they got denied, then that'll be down here, needs help complaining or appealing service denial. That's 4.6. And there's a list here of a lot of different services, almost every service that you could get under Medicare or Medicaid. So we could say, let's say it's physical therapy, form of denial, official reason, what level was this at? Was this an internal appeal, a fair hearing, etc.? So that's really important for us to categorize the work we're doing. Like I said, this is something where clearly it's CHA-centric. I mean, this was made with CHA in mind, and some of these we're kind of shoehorning our long-term care issues in here, and they don't quite fit. But do the best you can, and if you have questions about which category you should use for a particular issue, just let me know. And finally, service session information. So this is what did you do. Put in how much time you spent, and amount saved. This is dollar amount saved. This is pretty much always going to be 0. If you actually have a dollar amount saved through your advocacy, let us know. We're going to try to come up with some uniform way of valuing and calculating that on certain types of cases in the future. But for now, generally, it's going to be 0. Actions taken. Always, we're giving orientation, information, and advice. Right? Everybody gets that. If you give them the phone number for New York Medicaid Choice, that would be made referral or to some other entity. If you looked up the provider networks of a FIDA plan, or if you looked up the MLTC model contract to see whether a particular service was covered or not, then that would be investigated or researched. Helped understand documents. Anybody calling about the FIDA announcement letter, we helped them understand the FIDA announcement letter, and that will still be true for the other notices that are coming out. Helped fill out forms, negotiated informally, initiated formal process, represented informal process, identified systemic problem. Let's make sure to use that. For those of you who identified that spate of home care reductions by Fidelis, that's a perfect example. That's a systemic problem. Log it in your case. That's exactly the kind of stat that we want to report on to DOH. Contacted third party. Let's say you conferenced in Maximus so that the caller could opt out of FIDA, then that would be great. If you conference in an MLTC plan to try to understand why there was a change in the person's care plan, that's a good example. And there are other options here as well. And the notes, hopefully you have notes in your case management database, and you can just copy and paste them and maybe redact identifying information. In some cases, I think what people are doing is just putting in like a little brief synopsis of what the case was about. I think from a case review standpoint, more case notes is better, but I think we'll have to find a good balance between getting something comprehensive and having it be onerous for you and potentially inadvertently disclosing confidences in those case notes. If you have to go digging through the case notes to redact things, I know that's not realistic. But there have to be some notes in there because otherwise there's really no way for us to see what advice was given or what questions the caller had or anything like that. I don't know. Do those of you who are working in who already work with CHA, is that different from how you're working now? I mean, does anybody have any questions about that? No? Any questions in general about entering things in the database? All right, so once you've put in everything that you needed to put in on the case, then in many cases the case will be over, right? This is a case that you already entered in your own system, and now you're just putting it in our system for reporting purposes. And the case might have been a half-an-hour phone call, and now it's over. So you can just click on Close Case, and now it goes back to the case screen, and it says case beginning insurance health plan data has been copied to case ending insurance health plan fields. Please verify these fields. So what this means is that the CHA database takes a snapshot of the individual's insurance at the beginning of the case and then takes another one at the end of the case so that we can track whether your intervention led to a change in insurance for the consumer. So in many cases that won't be true. So it's going to copy the opening insurance to the closing insurance, and 9 times out of 10 that's exactly what should happen, and you can just close it like that. But every now and then you will be helping someone, let's say, enroll in a new plan or switch plans, so you want to make sure to enter that on the case closing insurance. So maybe this person left Integra MLTC and now they're in Integra FIDA, so we'll have to change that here. Okay. The other fields that you'll have to put in, closure reason, was the case completed or was it a loss to follow up? And is it a story bank case? If it is, so a story bank case means this is a case that has a really compelling story, very sympathetic situation or client, or a really good example of how your intervention helped somebody. And we might want to use that story to help in either grant report, reports to DOH, or on the website, in marketing or outreach, to help people understand what ICAN does and how we can help people. So if you have a case like that, that's great. We love those. You need to produce them as part of your contracts with us. And so when you get one of those cases, make sure to get a media release to the client as soon as you can. so that if we do want to follow up with that client and use their story, we'll already have permission from them, if they gave it, to use their story. So I will, if you have one, let me know, and I'll get you the media release, and we can take it from there. So once you've filled in any missing fields, you can, oh, here's a perfect example. So remember I said there were some fields that were optional when you're entering it, but when you get ready to close it, they become mandatory. So here's one. Is disability related to case, right? Marital status, employment status, right? So now, since I didn't enter them before, now I have to go back and enter those. And I just said declined to answer for each of those. So now I think I have everything I need, and I'm going to click Save. And there we go. There's my closed case. All right, so any questions, folks? All right, if anything else comes up, you know where to find me. And I will just send around that little agenda that we have been working from in the beginning. Thank you all for your patience. I know this was not the most scintillating topic, but I hope you have an awesome Friday evening and a great weekend. And we'll talk to you all next week. Take care.